Good evening. It is good to see you tonight. Have a good number with us. We're encouraged by your presence. Our study this evening is from 2 Samuel chapter 18. I suppose the reality is we're probably going to just read this chapter as a springboard for a discussion on parenting, but certainly we'll understand when we read this chapter why we're going there. The end of chapter 17, which we did not finish last week, as you recall, there were two counselors for Absalom who had usurped the throne of his own father and had brought about a coup, had dethroned his own father. David is on the run, barefoot, and having to reassemble whatever army he could put back together to protect himself. And so Absalom has taken the city and has now set up a tent in sight of all Israel so that he can go into his father's wives, his concubines, and there disgrace his father, again at the behest of Ahithophel, one of his counselors. But Hushai was there also as a counselor, but he was a plant. David had actually dispatched Hushai to be there to overthrow the counsel of Ahithophel, because Ahithophel was well regarded in the time of David and Absalom. In fact, we read last week where the word of Ahithophel was like that of God, an oracle of God. And so if Ahithophel said it, you could pretty much count on it. And it is the case that when you look at the advice that Ahithophel gave to Absalom, it was sound military advice, not the part about desecrating his father with going into his father's wives. That was a horrible thing that he did. But again, that was calculated on his part. But nevertheless, he did advise him properly to take his father out while his father was still on the run and unprepared, and would certainly have an advantage over him. But Hushai was there to flatter him and to convince him it would be better to assemble a large army from the north to the south throughout all Israel and let him ride in front of this army and take all the glory for the utter and certain defeat of David in time to come. This was the advice of Hushai. He was David's plant, and God allowed the counsel of Hushai to win out over the counsel of Ahithophel. And so in verse 23 of chapter 17, when Ahithophel saw that his advice was not followed, he saddled a donkey and arose, went home to his house, to his city. He put his household in order and hanged himself and died. And he was buried in his father's tomb. A very tragic end to a man who was highly regarded by two kings, one the legitimate king, the other the usurper, but nevertheless a man that was highly regarded because of his counsel has now taken his own life for obvious reasons. He knew that because his counsel was not heeded, he knew that what Hushai was advising was stupid to the extreme and meant utter defeat for Absalom and his forces. He knew this, and he knew that his days were numbered, and so rather than wait for David's wrath, he just took his own life and hung himself and ended the matter before it went any further. It's a tragic end to Ahithophel. Chapter 18. David numbered the people who were with him, and this is, again, I want to just reiterate, he's able to do this. He's able to muster his troops. He's able to set up new commanders over the three parts of his army. He's able to kind of reassess, reevaluate, and re-prepare himself for battle, which is what Hushai's counsel did for him. And so it gave him this opportunity. So now David numbers the people who were with him and set captains of thousands and captains of hundreds over them. David set out 1/3 of the people under the hand of Joab, 1/3 under the hand of Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, Joab's brother, and 1/3 under the hand of Ittai, the Gittite. And the king said to the people, I also will surely go out with you myself. But the people answered, You shall not go out, for if we flee away, they will not care about us, nor if half of us die, will they care about us. But you are worth 10,000 of us now, for you are now more help to us in the city. As the king said to them, Whatever seems best to you, I will do. So the king stood beside the gate, and all the people went out by hundreds and by thousands. Now the king had commanded Joab, Abishai, and Ittai, saying, deal gently for my sake with the young man Absalom. And all the people heard when the king gave all the captain's orders concerning Absalom. So the people went out into the field of battle against Israel, and the battle was in the woods of Ephraim. The people of Israel were overthrown before the servants of David. Now again, just want to make sure everyone understands, when we speak of the army of Israel, we're talking about Absalom's forces. And of course, we're now seeing the servants of David. According to Josephus, Absalom had well over 40,000 in his army. David had somewhere a little over 4,000 in his army. So more than outnumbered, 10-1. And there was a great slaughter of 20,000. It took place there that day, for the battle there was scattered over the face of the whole countryside. And the wood devoured more people that day than the sword devoured. Again, this is not clear in this text, but again, to cite Josephus and Jewish tradition, David's men killed 20,000 with the sword, and the woods took out more than that. Falling in pits, getting their heads caught in trees or whatever. I mean, they just died because the woods devoured more than the sword. It does say that the woods devoured more than the sword that day. But you could read it and say, well, because they were fighting in the woods, they were at a disadvantage. But I don't know, maybe Josephus had it right, and maybe there was a wholesale slaughter here of tens of thousands of Israelite forces. Yes, sir?
God was behind David.
Yes, he was. Yes.
That's pretty well it.
That's very much it. And David was a great warrior, and his men were seasoned veterans of war. And it was truly foolish to go on this venture. So Absalom met the servants of David. And Absalom rode on a mule. The mule went under the thick boughs of a great terebinth tree, and his head caught in the terebinth, so he was left hanging between heaven and earth. And the mule which was under him went on. Now a certain man saw it and told Joab and said, I saw Absalom hanging in a terebinth tree. Again, it's not stated here. It says he's hanging by his head. Josephus said it was his hair. They got hung in the tree. So Joab said to the man who told him, you just saw him? And why did you not strike him there to the ground? I would have given you 10 shekels of silver and a belt. But the man said to Joab, though I were to receive 1,000 shekels of silver in my hand, I would not raise my hand against the king's son. For in our hearing the king commanded you and Abishai and Ittai, saying, beware lest anyone touch the young man Absalom. Otherwise, I would have dealt falsely against my own life. For there is nothing hidden from the king, and you yourself would have set yourself against me. Joab said, I cannot linger with you. And he took 3 spears in his hand and thrust them through Absalom's heart while he was still alive in the midst of the terebinth tree. And 10 young men who bore Joab's armor surrounded Absalom and struck and killed him. This was a brutal death. They mutilated him. Joab blew the trumpet, and the people returned from pursuing Israel, for Joab held back the people. I mean, he didn't restrain them. That would have been an absolute wholesale slaughter. And they took Absalom and cast him into a large pit in the woods and laid a very large heap of stones over him. Then all Israel fled, everyone to his tent. Now Absalom in his lifetime had taken and set up a pillar for himself, which is in the king's valley, for he said, I have no son to keep my name in remembrance. He called the pillar after his own name, and to this day it is called Absalom's monument. Have you seen Absalom's monument? I believe it still stands to this day. You didn't visit that site? I think I saw it on the Discovery Channel a couple of years ago, but they still...
Where is it?
It's somewhere near Bethlehem, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. Yes?
It's the south side of Bethlehem.
I believe so. I'm not sure. I don't remember exactly. Yes.
How do you think they would have been around this period of time? Late 20, 30, 30?
No, we've been older than that.
Would it have been?
Absalom's a grown man and leading a coup in an army, and I'm guessing David's probably around 50, maybe in his 50s, maybe late 50s. Could have been older than that. He's got some time yet to go, but he's on the downward side of his reign. So he built this monument, and to this day it's called Absalom's monument. Verse 19, Ahimaaz, the son of Zadok, said, "Let me run now and take the news of the king, how the Lord has avenged him of his enemies." And Joab said to him, "You shall not take news this day, for you shall take the news another day. But today you shall take no news, because the king's son is dead." Joab said to the Cushite, that would be probably his personal slave, "Go tell the king what you have seen." So the Cushite bowed himself to Joab and ran. And Ahimaaz, the son of Zadok, said again to Joab, "But whatever happened, please let me also run after the Cushite." So Joab said, "Why will you run, my son, since you have no news ready?" "But whatever happens," he said, "let me run." So he said to him, "Run." Then Ahimaaz ran by the way of the plain and outran the Cushite. Now David was sitting between the two gates, and the watchman went up to the roof over the gate to the wall, lifted his eyes and looked, and there was a man running alone. The watchman cried out and told the king, and the king said, "If he is alone, there is news in his mouth." And he came rapidly and drew near. The watchman saw another man running, and the watchman called to the gatekeeper and said, "There is another man running alone." And the king said, "He also brings news." So the watchman said, "I think the running of the first is like the running of Ahimaaz, the son of Zadok." And the king said, "He is a good man and come with good news." So Ahimaaz called out and said to the king, "All is well," bowed down with his face to the earth before the king and said, "Blessed be the Lord your God, who has delivered up the men who raised their hand against my lord the king." The king said, "Is the young man Absalom saved?" Before we continue reading, what about this exchange strikes you?
He wasn't interested in anything else.
There was nothing else on his mind but Absalom. He didn't seem to care less whether his forces won or Absalom's forces won. Is Absalom okay? That's all he's worried about. Ahimaaz answered in a lie. He already knew the truth. Joab had already discussed it with him. When Joab said, "The king's servant and me, your servant, I saw a great tumult, but I did not know what it was about." That's a lie. And the king said, "Turn aside and stand here." I think he knew he was lying. So he turned aside and stood still. Just then the Cushite came. And the Cushite said, this is probably a man from Ethiopia, in that area around Ethiopia, "There's good news, my lord the king, for the Lord has avenged you this day of all those who rose against you." The king said to the Cushite, "Is the young man Absalom saved?" So the Cushite answered, "May the enemies of my lord the king and all who rise against you to do you harm be like that young man." The king was deeply moved and went up to the chamber over the gate and wept. And as he went, he said thus, "Oh, my son Absalom, my son Absalom, if only I had died in your place. Oh, Absalom, my son, my son." It is amazing when you think of all that was on David's mind. Now, Roger, you said something a moment ago, and I want to just touch on a few points here before we get into our lesson. I believe Matthew Henry and others have suggested that David was sinning in this matter. I don't know that I agree with that, but the suggestion comes from Aaron, the brother of Moses, who had two sons who died at judgment from the Lord. And he was told, "Do not let your hair down, do not tear your clothes, do not mourn for them." David's not just mourning for Absalom, he's crying out loud. He's making a spectacle of himself. He's lost emotional control over himself. I don't know that many of us could blame him, but nevertheless, he's lost control of himself. And I think there's a legitimate question that should be raised here. I mean, when you think of all the faults that David had, dishonoring God in this way is not typical of David. If, in fact, Matthew Henry's right and he's dishonoring God by mourning over the loss of this rebel whom God allowed in his judgment to be taken out. I mean, to die without mercy under 2 or 3 witnesses, that was the decree under the old law. And that's a harsh punishment. But David's not just crying a little bit, he's crying a lot. He's calling attention to this whole thing. I think there's more at play here than just David's love for his son. Indeed, that's what's behind it. But I think what has really thrown fuel on this fire is that he realizes this has happened because of my sin. I'm the reason that I've had so much trouble in my family. And it's really destroying him from within. He just can't handle it.
Well,
Consider the 38th Psalm, Roger. Let's turn very quickly there, and then I'll take your comments. I do want to read the 38th Psalm, a psalm written, no doubt, at this time. O Lord, do not rebuke me in your wrath, nor chasten me in your hot displeasure. For your arrows pierce me deeply, and your hand presses me down. There is no soundness in my flesh because of your anger, nor any health in my bone because of my sin. For my iniquities have gone over my head like a heavy burden. They are too heavy for me. My wounds are foul and festering because of my foolishness. I'm troubled. I'm bowed down greatly. I go mourning all the day long, for my loins are full of inflammation, and there is no soundness in my flesh. I'm feeble and severely broken. I groan because of the turmoil of my heart. Lord, all my desire is before you, and my sighing is not hidden from you. My heart pants, my strength fails me. As for the light of my eyes, it also has gone from me. My loved ones and my friends stand aloof from my plague, and my relatives stand afar off. Those also who seek my life lay snares for me. Those who seek my hurt speak of destruction and plan deception all the day long. But I, like a deaf man, do not hear. I'm like a mute who does not open his mouth. Thus I'm like a man who does not hear, in whose mouth there is no response. For in you, O Lord, I hope. You will hear, O Lord my God. For I said, hear me, lest they rejoice over me, lest when my foot slips they exalt themselves against me. For I'm ready to fall, and my sorrow is continually before me. For I will declare my iniquity. I will be in anguish over my sin. But my enemies are vigorous, and they are strong. And those who hate me wrongfully have multiplied. Those also who render evil for good, they are my adversaries, because I follow what is good. Do not forsake me, O Lord. O my God, do not be far from me. Make haste to help me, O Lord, my salvation. David was in deep mourning because he realized he had contributed mightily to this terrible series of events that had culminated in the death of his son Absalom.
well, passage is that the sword would not
That's right.
leave his family and him.
That's right. So this is a very, very difficult pill to swallow. But I mention all of this because as parents, there's not a one of us that doesn't worry day and night about our children. And we all have asked. I know when our children are old enough to drive and they take the car out for the first time, you're asking yourself, is the young man safe? Is my daughter all right? Are they okay? But in a far greater sense, we, as parents, as Christian parents, look at our children. And we're asking spiritually, are they okay? Are they all right? Will they make it? And I think like David, but not so much like David, but in the sense that I believe David is here expressing such emotion. As parents, we wind up beating ourselves up far more than we should. I'm not saying that as parents we don't sometimes contribute to the delinquency of our own children. It's better that a millstone be hanged about our necks than to cause one of those little ones, especially one of our own, to be driven away from the faith and from the Lord. But I think it's also important to remember that when our children grow up and become men and women of their own, they have their own mind about them. And they have their own choices to make. And we cannot bear the burden of every decision they make. And if they make foolish decisions and they hurt themselves, They bring shame to their lives. We can't always carry that burden and say, the reason this happened is because of me. Now, you may say that it is. And it may be. It may be that some, like David, grieve because they realize they've done some really horrible things. They set some really bad examples. But I think we need to keep things in perspective. And there are many examples, biblically speaking, where parents did the right thing and their children turned out horrible. And there were parents that did horrible things and their children turned out marvelous. And it reminds us that as children, we grow up and we become our own free moral agents. And we can't kick ourselves the rest of our lives and say, why is my child not where they need to be, doing what they should be doing, living the way they should be living? But at the same time, as parents, we have to be keenly aware that we primarily do have influence over our children and the direction that they will take. And it could be that we're saying things and doing things and behaving in ways and expressing attitudes and showing behavior around our children that is to their detriment. And if that's the case, we need to do everything we can to correct it. But at the same time, we need to be very careful not to blame ourselves for every bad choice they make. Sometimes children make bad choices in spite of their parents. And it's not always our fault. I'd like to take a few moments, digress from this text for a moment. I believe it's vitally important. Take a few moments and look at some passages from Proverbs. Who wrote most of the Proverbs? Not all of them, but most of them. Who's credited with writing them? David's son. And it's fascinating. And there's a lot in Proverbs that has to do with family life, with parenting in particular. You know, there are a lot of people that are offering a lot of advice today. Dr. Phil, Oprah Winfrey, Donald Trump. I mean, a lot of people are offering their advice for, how to raise your kids and what you should do with your children or not do with your children. And we flock to this person and we flock to that person and we think a lot of that celebrity and maybe not so much of the other celebrity, but we're listening to all these people when really we should be listening to God. We should really, as a society, just stop and say, Lord, we need you to speak to us through your word and give us wisdom. Let no man deceive himself. If any man among you seem to be wise in this world, let him become a fool, that he may be wise. For the wisdom of this world is foolishness with God. 1 Corinthians 3, 18 to 20 reminds us. There's a lot of foolishness in this world. We can't go wrong if we listen to the book of Proverbs and we listen to what God says to us. When you think about parenting, I guess the first thing that comes to mind when you think about your role as a parent is that you are a role model. And you hear the expression stated a number of ways. They'll do as you do and not as you say. And we recognize from that they're going to pattern their behavior, their attitudes, their lifestyle to a large extent based on what they see in us. And they're going to live their life and base their decisions pretty much on what they see in us. There are some forces at work that are trying to disrupt this paradigm in our families. And one of them is the tax code. And I'm not going to get political. I'm just stating a fact. It is a simple fact that today to have a normal standard of living, it requires at least two incomes. One of them pays taxes. The other one pays the bills. Now, back in the days, when Leave It to Beaver was on TV and Andy Griffith was a popular show to watch, one person could go to work and earn enough money to provide for the family and still have some for savings and retirement. And everybody was happy. Even the government was happy, I think, more than they are now. But nevertheless, things were simpler then. But the government grew, and it grew, and it grew. And the more we thought government could do for us, the more the government took from us. And you see, that's the great irony. And while we're saying, oh, the government's going to give me health care, and the government's going to give me education, and now Bernie Sanders said the government's going to give you a car, and the government's going to give you everything you ever wanted. Well, isn't that nice? Well, how's the government going to do that? They're going to steal it from us, and they're going to redistribute it to everybody. And how do they do that? They make us work and work and work. Well, where does that leave the kids? Where do most people put their kids today?
Somebody else is raising.
You know, when my parents were coming along, they complained about having to bend over and pick cotton. I never had to do that. I can't bend over much. It hurts my lower back. My lower back has always given me trouble. I can't imagine having to bend over and pick cotton. But you know, in those days when they were tearing their arms and hands up, picking those cotton bowls, whatever you call them. What do you call them, bowls? Who were they doing that with? And so who were they watching? Who were they around? Who were they with?
The children.
Children and parents were working together. It was a family matter, wasn't it? And so you're spending not just a little bit of time, but a lot of time. I remember Brother Porter would say to me sometimes when we would be talking, he said, I think I spent too much time with my daddy. I couldn't wait to get out of there. I'm like, well, I understand that too, because he worked him. Worked him in the field, plowing the fields, cutting the wood, and all the chores that are associated with that life. Brother Porter was a fine man, though. Brother Porter learned great values that helped him as a human being to be a decent human being. What are children learning today? I think I do know. I deal with a lot of them who wear orange shirts and striped pants. I deal with them every day. And I know what this generation is producing. I see it firsthand every day. It's not a pretty picture. Really be better off if we would start picking cotton again, or something, maybe not cotton, something that, would sustain us, but it would force us to spend more time with our parents. The problem is, even for parents that have time to be with their kids, what do they typically do? Here's the remote, get out of my hair. They're not going to be young very long. And the older I get, and I'm not that old, I'm not old yet, but the older I get, the more I realize that is true. They grow up really fast. Paul will be 5 years old tomorrow. That's my second grandson. I got 7 grandchildren, but he can be 5 years old tomorrow. I remember when Adam was 5 years old. Like it was yesterday.
I remember when you were 5 years old.
You remember when I was 5 years old? And that was yesterday. And the first man, Adam, is now holding the man of the covenant in his arms. And it won't be long until Abram is probably teaching a Bible class one day. And he'll start to realize, too, they're not here long. Children need to look to their parents for identity. Who are we? What do we believe? What is our worldview? And what's important to us? And that's one of the things I did when my children were coming along. We don't do that. I always use terms like that. Now, that's not what we do here. We don't do that. I mean, they learned just by speaking that way. That's not what we do. That's not who we are. We are this or that or this. But I was always there to make sure they knew this is what we are, not let someone else define that for me. So we have to be role models. Yes, Rick, you had a comment?
I was saying, I don't want to get off track because it kind of goes along with that, but what happened was, in the 60s, we had the love and the hippie movement. Then we had Dr. Scott tell us that we were being too hard on our kids in our generation. And then the culmination of technology and things of this nature and Hollywood's influence and media's influence and all of these things are still telling us that we're doing the wrong thing.
Mm-hmm.
Even though we have the instruction right here in front of us. And that is what's more important, and we have just gone away from the family. The family is just 50 years ago.
Not to mention by law, we're not at minimum, that you can correct your child.
That's right. Lester,
You know what I'm saying? I mean,
you had a comment? Could you stand up? I can't hear you over that glass.
Big thing about kids nowadays is pressing buttons, and another thing, way back when we lived with people with them, there wasn't none of this
Yeah, that's right. They were taught respect. And, yes, sir. I think I still would, probably.
Me too.
Yeah, Brian? I'm sorry, Roger?
One of our great problems in the sixties was that the educational system in our country changed drastically. And now it has come full circle.
Yes.
And it continues to go down, not up.
The ideology completely changed. Brian?
Kind of tailing off of that comment about education. We, as a Christian nation that we used to be, our education was founded on the Bible and Christian values, as well as our family and our businesses and even our government. But at some point, and it was slow, like a frog in the water turned the heat up, we as Christians in the nation, collectively, allow the government to come in and do the things for our neighbors and our families that the church
Should be doing.
had the responsibility of doing. And now we've even gone so far as to allow the government to come in and tell us how we raise our children, because they actually now belong to the state, not to us.
You think the government wants to do that, Brian? You think they want power? You think they want control over it? You're one of those, aren't you? You think the government wants to control us. You're one of those Thomas Jefferson types. You don't trust government, do you?
Go along with that. Amen,
But
brother.
we've done it willingly, slowly.
That's the sad thing. We've invited it, hadn't we?
Convinced out of convenience. It's just like our electronics stuff. Well, this is a new thing that's more convenient for you. Well, how much time do you have left now with all your conveniences in your life?
Les? Proverbs 23:26. My son, give me thine heart, and let thine eyes observe my ways. In her autobiography, Linda Ellerby, then co-anchor of NBC News overnight, once received this letter from a little girl. Dear Miss Ellerby, when I grow up, I want to do exactly what you do. Please do it better. End of quote. It's really a thought for parents, isn't it? Those little eyes are watching us. Little feet are following us. Little minds are scrutinizing us. I'm trying to instill in my son just how important it is to recognize how much his son wants to imitate him. So when he sees Daddy with a pistol, he wants to have a pistol. He sees Daddy with a knife, he wants to have a knife. He sees Daddy with a chainsaw, he wants a chainsaw. Those things are fine, but not for a 3-year-old or a 4-year-old. And so we have to be careful that when our children are watching us, they need to watch us. But they also need to be kept safe. And so we want them to observe us, but don't do everything we do. I think my grandson Arthur probably epitomizes that truth more than anyone I have ever seen. He imitates everything. He doesn't miss anything. He sees everything that you do and repeats most everything he hears, good or bad. So I know what Angela and Adam talk about in their home. In 1 Kings 22, verse 43, Jehoshaphat, the son of Asa, walked in all the ways of his father. He did not turn aside from it, doing that which was right in the eyes of the Lord. Now, as parents, we don't just have to remember that we're role models and setting an example for our children, but we need to remember that children are immature human beings. And they're not the smartest human beings in the room. And just because a child wants something and stomps their feet and demands something doesn't mean they should have that something. And as parents, we need to be able to say, you ain't getting that. And this is why you're not getting that. And be able to explain that to them. So a critical aspect of parenting is guiding and correction, or we might say reproof. And so children need to be reproved from time to time. Foolishness is bound in the heart of a child, but the rod of correction will drive it far from him. Proverbs 22, verse 15 says. Yes, ma'am?
This kind of goes back to what we've been talking about already, but our young
Uh-huh.
And back in the winter, when the weather was so bad and Roger was having so much trouble and he couldn't get out, one Wednesday night, Keith came to me and said, "Don't you think Daddy would be better if he was at church? Y'all have always gone to church." And I just looked at him.
He'd been watching you.
But
You
he
know-
went to church his whole life until he became an adult.
Well, but he's observed that from you. So you've taught him. Does he put two syllables in out as well? He says out. How'd you say that? Say it. Out.
Out.
Does he say it that way too? Okay, I didn't know. It's hard for me to do that, but
He gets that from his wife.
oh, okay. Okay. Man, you talk about whipping a child nowadays, and you're just a horrible human being, you know? Man, you are old-fashioned brute. You know, lay a hand on a child. Why do you spank a child? So they won't wind up in prison. That's why. And I'm going to say it. I said it a few weeks ago. I'm going to say it again. It's better to whip a kid, especially a kid, than it is to make them spend years in prison. Beat them. It won't kill them. Now, you know, when Solomon says beat a child, he doesn't mean by that physically abuse them. In fact, the word beat can be translated clap or strike lightly. Now, I will say this: if you strike too lightly, you're just going to make them mad at you. There's a balancing act. You know, it has to hurt. You want it to hurt. Otherwise, you're just insulting them. But our children need to know that they're free to choose, to make their choices, but that there are consequences to the choices that they make once they made them. Another work, really, and responsibility of parents is providing refuge for our children. When you think about what our children need, we typically think food, clothes, shelter. Well, that's true. But when you think about a home, do you think of home different than you do a house? You say, this is our house. But what's the difference in a house and a home? Can anyone tell me the difference in a house and a home? Love. Okay, that's a good word to summarize what I'm about to say.
Home is where your heart is,
Okay, but why is your heart there?
because those are the things that you care about.
There are a lot of children that want to get out of home or a house as fast as they can get out. I don't want to stay here anymore. Why? Because they're not emotionally supported. They're not encouraged. They're not strengthened. They're not ever told, I'm proud of you. I love you. You're a good son. You're a good daughter. They're never told anything that makes them feel worthwhile at all. But they're continually berated, ignored, mistreated, and abused. And at some point they say, I'm ready to get out of here. I want to go find what I'm looking for, and they will find it somewhere. And they usually find it on the streets, which causes them once again to wind up in the wrong place. Better is a dinner of herbs where love is, Sister Betty, than a stalled ox and hatred therewith. Proverbs 15, verse 17. Home is a place where children should want to live, not just have to live. There's some things Solomon tells us we should do for our children as well. In Proverbs 20, verse 11, he says, even a child is known by his doings, whether his work be pure and whether it be right. The American Standard Version says, even a child makes himself known by his doings. And the phrase makes himself known implies they're being observed. Who's observing children? Well, they're supposed to be, aren't they? Not always today, but that's who's supposed to be observing children. Primarily, our parents. More times than not, it's the mothers in our homes. And we'll say more about that in a moment. The next verse in Proverbs 20, verse 12, in the very same chapter, the hearing ear and the seeing eye, the Lord has made both of them. It's almost like God is saying, He gave you these senses to utilize them for your children, so that you can watch them, so that you can observe them. So just as your children are watching you and imitating you, you need to be watching them. And when you watch your children, what is it you're looking for? What are you trying to see? Well, we've heard that other axiom, or that truism that Solomon tells us: train up a child in the way he should go, and what? And we typically read that and we say, what that means is, if you teach him the right from the wrong, he's always going to choose the right. That's not what Solomon meant. What he meant is, you observe that child and you learn some children are different. Well, no, let me rephrase. All children are different. It's like fingerprints. I mean, they're not any of them exactly alike. Some of them are normal like me, but most kids are not as normal as me. There's something different about them. I'm the norm. I'm the kind of the standard, for children. Still a child. What was that? Is that a groan?
Your mom's gonna get you.
Oh. Oh, my mama was great. She's going to say amen in a minute, I'm sure. Do I? Once a punk, always a punk. Okay, that. Anyway, probably. But children are different. Some of them are better at just sitting down and reading a book and learning. Some children need to draw pictures to express themselves and learn. Some kids learn better by putting their hands on things and working with things. Some kids are quiet. Some kids are loud. Some kids are, they're artistically inclined. Some kids are not so much so. Some are outgoing and some are more introverted. I mean, people are different. God made us different for a reason. We have different roles to fill. But as parents, we need to look at these different traits and qualities and work with that child and nurture that child accordingly, so that we can help steer that child in the way that child should go. And so which way should your child go? I don't know. As a child, you say, I know what I want to do when I grow up. Do you? Do you really know? Maybe you do. Maybe you're smart enough, at 2 or 3 years old to know that. Man, I've seen some stuff on Facebook recently just blow your mind about kids that can play pianos and guitars. I'm like, maybe it's all just Facebook stuff. It's not real. I don't know. But, little kids doing stuff. It's like, wow, that's amazing. Yes, sir.
As a church, we have a responsibility as much as the parents to try to guide these children to go the right direction.
I don't know if I'd say as much as the parents, but we certainly have a supportive role with parents to do the same thing, yes, to help nurture that and encourage that, as we're doing in this class.
I know when I was 12 years old, a fellow by the name of Lamar got me in front of the church and made me lead a song.
Made you do it.
I didn't have much of a choice.
Let me read something very quickly before our time runs out, and I think we're going to have maybe 5 minutes longer tonight than usual, because we have a good audience with us tonight, and you're eager to learn, so you don't want to go anywhere. If you're going to observe your children, it means you have to spend time with them. My precious boy with the golden hair came up one day beside my chair and fell upon his bended knee and said, "Oh, Mommy, please play with me." I said, "Not now. Go on and play. I've got much to do today." He smiled through tears and eyes so blue when I said, "We'll play when I get through." But the chores lasted all through the day, and I never did find time to play. When supper was over and dishes done, I was much too tired for my little son. I tucked him in and kissed his cheek and watched my angel fall asleep. As I tossed and turned upon my bed, those words kept ringing in my head. "Not now, son. Go on and play. I've got so much to do today." I fell asleep, and in a minute's span, my little boy is a full-grown man. No toys are there to clutter the floor, no dirty fingerprints on the door, no snacks to fix, no tears to dry. The room just echoed my lonely sigh. And now I've got time to play, but my precious boy has gone away. I woke myself with a pitiful scream and realized it was just a dream. For across the room in his little bed lay my curly-haired boy, the sleepyhead. My work will wait till another day, for now I must find some time to play. Matthew Henry commented, "Even a child is known by his doings," and he said this: "Parents should observe their children that they may manage them accordingly." interesting word he uses. Managing. Who has a manager? Well, important people have managers. Donald Trump has a chief of staff, a manager. Baseball players, football players, actors, actresses have managers. Children need to be managed because children are extremely important in our lives. As arrows are in the hand of a mighty man, so are children of the youth. Happy is a man that has a quiver full of them. They shall not be ashamed, but they shall speak with the enemies in the gate. Just like you have to aim that arrow and propel it in the right direction. So our children need to be aimed and propelled in the right direction. We have an awesome responsibility as parents. It's tragic when you hear David screaming out, "Oh, Absalom! My son Absalom, would to God I had died in your stead." He knew he deserved to die for what he had done. But now death has come to his door, and he has to live with that tragedy for the remainder of his days. What a tragic end to Absalom's life, and what a tragic end as a parent to see your family in such shambles. David wasn't totally a mess, though. He did have a son, Solomon, and he was the wisest man that ever lived, other than the Lord, which is saying something. So David wasn't a total failure. And as parents, we're going to make mistakes, but we're not total failures either. And when you stop beating ourselves up, and I think far too often we spend too much time beating ourselves up, saying, I could have done something. Of course you could have done something different. We all wish we could go back and do something different. Let's be thankful that we've given ourselves time and attention to listen to God and to give it our best shot. And remember, at the end of the day, our children become adults, and they have minds of their own, and they'll have to make their own choices, and they'll have to live with those consequences. And all we can do is be here to support them, love them, and care for them when they decide to return to us. We need to pray for our children. Pray for ourselves as parents and grandparents that we can do a better job with our families. Any questions or comments before we're inundated by kids? Yes, sir?
I do. I wasn't raised by Christian parents. My dad was very abusive to me. I was beat a lot. You think you could beat a child and make him good? You can. I went to prison. I always told myself I would be a better parent than what I was raised by. To some degree, I was a better parent. I didn't beat my children. But I didn't do what I needed to do. And I hear you talk about your parents, and I know the way you raised your kids, other people in this church. It saddens me to know that I didn't do what I needed to as a Christian father. And it hurts me to think that I was deprived of being raised not good parent. My parents were okay, but they weren't Christians. And it was later in life before that really came into their lives. I respect you, people like sitting here today, because of the values you have set for your family.
Thank you. I appreciate you, but
And it really, really makes me feel good to know that it's been 30 years since I walked away from this church, and it makes me feel so good to know that this family has taken me back.
we're still here.
I know.
We still love you. We love you, brother.
But I love hearing you especially.
Well, thank you. I appreciate what you said.
Don't talk about it too much, you give me
Yeah. Yeah. I got to get out the door. My head won't fit through the door yet. What? Once upon always upon. Your song? It didn't help, listen. I still got a big head. 822? Number 822 in your songbooks, please. 822. Huh?
My hair is gone too.
Don't forget, this Sunday at 6 p.m., we're going to be having a potluck ice cream social, and everyone is encouraged to attend. We will have ice cream here and information available for all the events, both year-round and for the convention, as well as sign-up sheets for children and adults to help with the program. So please remember, this Sunday evening, 6 o'clock, be back here for the ice cream and Lads Leaders kickoff. Camping and Gahee registration is now open. There's discounted price for those who register before May 31st. Don't forget the baby bottle boomerang. I think you can see Tessa about that. If you already distributed some of those, I haven't seen one yet. You're going to have to do a better job. I need to see one. Come get, remind me. Put it in the announcements. Okay, make sure we announce the baby bottle boomerang. Okay. Don't forget the family day at my house, the 28th, which is Memorial Day. That's that Monday. And so we're going to start around 9 o'clock, and I'll run you off when I get tired of you. More details will be announced in time to come. I don't know, we haven't yet set a menu. Probably going to have hamburgers and hot dogs like we usually do, and bring fixings and have a good time, hang out, and just enjoy fellowship. So please remember that, coming up the 28th of this month. Also, the area-wide widowhood luncheon will be the 30th, that Wednesday following at 11:30, and there's going to be a cookout lunch. And Dean Miller, minister of the Murray City Church of Christ. Murray City, is that right? Murray City, is it Murray? Murray City Church of Christ in Murray City, Tennessee will be the guest speaker on that occasion. Certainly always glad to see him when he's here. Macy Hooten is recovering from foot surgery, and any word on that, report on that? Okay, well, it did go well, and so she's recovering, and we're glad to hear that. Regina had an MRI today and possibly will be having surgery in the next week or so, we don't know, on her knee to have it repaired. But I want to ask you to remember her in your prayers. Also, Ann and Stan McGuire are at home not feeling well tonight. Is Robert still home not feeling well? Certainly want to remember these in our prayers. Any other announcements we need to make before we dismiss? Number 822. Oh, yeah, Paul, where are you? Get the fingers out of your mouth. You're going to be 5 years old tomorrow. And who? Sadie, that's right. You know, they were born on the same day. I remember that now. I'm getting old. You're gonna be what? You'll be 5 too, won't you? You're born at the same day? My. But not in the same place. You're in a different country, right? You're in Texas, weren't you? Okay.
Another country.
Yeah. Well, all right. So Herman or Jonathan, one of you two, going to lead us in happy birthday when we... Okay, that'll work. Thank you. 822. We were discussing the life of David and his family, and particularly Absalom, and that tragic scene where David was heartbroken over the loss of his son. The point I was making, and I want to make again, is that when children grow up, they become their own person, and they make their own choices. Some of them make good choices, some of them make poor choices, but they make their own choices. But it's a reminder that all of us, as adults, as free moral agents, have to make our own choices. And as we prepare to sing this song, dismiss this service, we have a convenient opportunity to respond to the invitation to obey the gospel, to be restored to our rightful place among the people of God if need be. Certainly this is a choice that we can make. And it's a choice that if you're needing to make, I pray and urge you to make that choice known tonight. And make it known right now while together we stand as we sing.
God is God.